So, last week we were thinking about the fact that our lives move in the direction of our strongest thoughts, and therefore it's really important that we give more of our thoughts to God and to Jesus so that we move in that direction and become more like Him. And we do that by spending time studying and reading the Bible and praying. This week, I want to think just a little bit about Path of Renewal, about how we got to that process within the life of the church and where we are as a congregation as part of that process as it has gone on. I'm conscious that a lot of what I have to say this week is in setting the scene, and therefore it's a bit negative. There is some good news, but next week I want to go to the other side of it. So this is kind of how we got to where we are, and next week we'll do a bit more about where we might go and what it might look like. So there is positive news coming. I also want to make it clear that when I talk about the congregation, I'm thinking about a generic congregation. I'm not thinking about this congregation. And that's because I want you to think about this congregation and where you think it chimes with or matches what I'm saying generally. Don't always ask you to do some work, but there you are. That's your work for today. Work out, do you see similarities and things in common with this or not? The Path of Renewal process is based on work by William Bridges. He is an expert on change management. He's a business consultant. And I'm not entirely sure that business consultants always have relevant things to say to the church because we are not a business. But in this case, I think there is something in what he says. In this case, he says you can identify every organization has a kind of cycle that you go through, and you can identify the different phases and stages of that cycle for an organization. And so I think there's something in that in the church. And so there they are. There's the organizational stages that he identifies. Dream the dream, launch the venture, getting organized, making it, becoming an institution, closing in, and dying. Think of Kodak. Kodak was at one point the biggest manufacturer of photographic film. And it no longer exists. Although film is making a comeback, I read this week. All the hipsters are into film, apparently, so it's making a comeback. But Kodak was this huge company that simply didn't change. It didn't take on and adopt any of the issues that came with digital cameras or digital photography, and it could have. It was in place to be able to do that, but they chose not to. And no longer exists. The first three stages are like childhood. Stage one is fairly obvious. It's where you have the idea for your organization or your business. You're going to set up this new business. Whoa, we've got this dream. But then you need stage two, where you actually decide you're going to go to the bank and say, going to give me some money so that I can actually do this. So you get it launched, and maybe you do that with your pal. And the main goal at that stage is survival, because you've put your money in it. And if it doesn't survive, you might lose your house. And that's a time of just chaos. You and your pal are doing everything, but you know everything there is to know about the business, because there's only the two of you, so you need to know absolutely what is going on. And there's a lack of organization, but it's compensated for by the fact that the two of you are totally dedicated. You will give up every hour of the day to make sure this business venture succeeds. Stage three is when the organization has grown a wee bit, and perhaps now you've grown so much that you need to take on other staff. But they don't need to know everything about the business. They only need to know their wee bit. And so there's an organization that begins to come in, a bit of structure that begins to come into. People need specific roles. Then stages 4 and 5, the organization's doing what it's set out to do. You're making your business work. It's just brilliant. Everything's going really well. And then there's just a wee subtle change that comes in, and it changes from doing to being. It stops being about doing the business to being the business, where making an impression is more important than making the product. Stage 6 is the first part of decline, where the organisation begins to focus on itself. It focuses on the internal dynamics. It's unwilling to respond to make any changes that it deems necessary for survival. The focus is on trivial internal issues such as roles and job titles and status, rather than on the core purpose that it was set up for. And stage 7 is the most obvious one of all. You're dead. I want to link that to the life cycle of a church, of a congregation, or a denomination. Stage 1 would be when people meet together and decide that it would be really great to be part of a community that nurtures their faith. These people really believe that developing a relationship with God through Jesus can make a tremendous difference in their own lives and in the lives of the world around them. Quite often in Scotland that happens because they fell out with the folk along the road and have decided to start their own church. Nevertheless, you can do good work by doing that. But you've got to actually have that dream and that vision to start off with. Stage 2 is when they decide to get together to form a church, perhaps even finding a building to meet in to take it to that next level instead of just having this dream. And then there's a decision about, what kind of denomination or group are you going to associate yourself with, knowing that there's a whole load of baggage that comes with that, both positive and negative. Stage 3 is when you begin to ask questions. So you've been meeting together, and you begin to say, well, actually, who are we? What are we about? What are we supposed to be doing? Who is it out there that we're supposed to be engaging with? But the focus is on the out there. It's on making an impact in the community and in the wider world. And as the people create things together, as they get together and this begins to blossom, it's really exciting and they're filled with energy and purpose and drive. And at this stage, no one says, we've never done it that way before. Because everything is a first. Everything is new. I used to have a wee card and it had 7, I can't remember what they all are, 7 things that killed the church. And the number 1 was, we've never done it that way before. But it's not like that because it's new, it's exciting, it's dynamic. Nobody's ever done it that way at all. God's presence is felt and drawn to that congregation's energy and joy. People come and they join with them and they find that their lives are changed in positive ways. The people have a common passion and they're working together to achieve a common aim. Stage 4 is where the patterns begin to develop. The norms are set. Life becomes a little bit more predictable. The church moves into a period that's marked by still outward extension but also inner stability. The congregation is successful in introducing people to faith. People are becoming Christians, their lives are being changed, but also in discipling them and taking them on in their walk with God. Typically at this stage in its life, the congregation has enough resources, both financial and human, to support the work that it's trying to do and is expected to do. The congregation still maintains that outward focus, but at the same time, it also finds that more of its time and energy is being taken up by administrative and building-related requirements. Over time, the congregation experiences internal change. People move away. Newcomers arrive with different passions and different gifts. Most significant, the majority of people who have been drawn to the congregation stay in the congregation because the church meets their needs. It was set up to meet the needs of others. But we've now reached a point where it's become about meeting our needs. The congregation's mission shifts from creating a place for others to maintaining a place for its own members. And that is a key factor in congregational decline. Stage 5 is what they call protective maintenance. Members feel protective towards the culture and the programs, the things that are associated with their congregation. They really like it. They're very proud of it. Everything is working. So why change it? And that's actually, I had a conversation with somebody locally, member of another congregation, who was asking that very question. The church services are full, and yet he's conscious that it's not what it should be. But when it's full, nobody's saying we need to change this. What they're saying is, it's working. Why would we change? But it's at that point that change would be most effective. And so, over a long number of years perhaps, people begin to drift away. Society changes, and the questions become, how do we get back what we had? How do we get people to come to us? And so congregations begin to tinker at the edges. They change the style of music. They demand shorter and shorter sermons, or ask that they be made less challenging. They introduce projectors and audio-visual stuff. People are encouraged to try harder and to do more. And folks are still really proud of their church, and they take pleasure in sharing it with visitors. Church members like the difference church involvement makes in their life. However, they can't tell you what that difference is. Instead, they point to features or activities, things that are happening in the life of the congregation that they appreciate. And in fact, what happens is they end up sharing their church rather than their faith. Stage 6 is a time of crisis and confusion. And that's why we have this path of renewal process, because in the Church of Scotland we are told this is where, as a denomination, we are. In a place of crisis and confusion. Now, it should not come as any surprise to anybody who has been in the Church of Scotland for any length of time. We have known for decades that the time would come when a whole slew of ministers would reach retirement age at the same time. We know that very few people are coming forward for ministry. Despite our best efforts, we're trying to get 30 ministers a year for a decade. Well, even if we did, which we haven't yet, but even if we did, that's 300 in a decade. But there are 600 vacancies. It doesn't work. So there's this time of crisis. In a time of crisis, you'd have thought people would have stopped talking about it and actually doing something. However, that's very difficult in the structures of a large denomination. People are keen, people are trying, and Path of Renewal is part of that trying and experimenting with change. In a business setting, the employees make the goods that management tells them to make. As long as the goods are made and people buy them, then the business does fine. The management might wish that the employees would really buy in. That's the big thing, to buy in. You've got to buy into everything. Because they want people to be invested and to really be keen, because that positive attitude makes the workplace a better place to work. But actually, the truth is, as long as they make the goods and they sell the goods, it doesn't really matter if the employees have been keen and have bought in. It doesn't really matter about their attitudes to their work. But that simply is not true of the church. Of course, the members in a congregation do the work, but the final product is supposed to be a community that embodies the mind and the heart of Christ. And you simply cannot do that if there is gossip and bitterness, anger, dissension, or if people simply are not displaying Christian behaviour and attitudes. It really matters how we live. Because as people look to the church in Scotland and see arguing about all sorts of trivia, all they're saying is, why would you want to be part of that? If folks go from a congregation and tell their pals how rubbish and how awful it was, the question is, well, why would you want to be part of that? If we're telling folks from other congregations that their congregation actually is much better than ours, then why would you want to be part of that? It matters. It really matters. Congregational decline is a reflection of a congregation's abandoning its fundamental purpose of being a community that brings other people into a loving, life-giving, transformational relationship with God, with each other, and with the world. There are 5 markers, very quickly, of a declining church. Number 1, growing the church rather than witnessing to faith. Members are out of touch with their own faith stories and how their lives have been and are being changed. If you were to ask what difference God was making in their life, most wouldn't be able to tell you. They don't know how to talk about God and about faith. They view people outside more in terms of what they can bring than in terms of the life-changing difference the church can make to them. Secondly, running the church rather than making disciples. The congregation becomes focused on maintaining what is there already. People attend meetings because they're in the calendar. What the church needs to keep it running takes precedence and priority over what people need to grow as disciples. Leaders spend time and energy enticing and motivating people to take on tasks rather than creating opportunities and venues for their development as followers of Jesus. Thirdly, people are people-led rather than spirit-led. Folks in the congregation are confident in their ability to run things, and they don't really think of turning to God for guidance. Meetings are for business. There might be a token prayer or a reading, but there's no real focus on prayer and listening for God. Fourthly, participating in mission projects without actually having a mission. The mission committee may be active, but the projects simply reinforce the congregation's self-image that they're doing something useful. These projects often reflect the interests of the individuals or the groups that arrange them. Here's a question. What is our mission statement? Does anybody know our mission statement? Yeah? Right, we're looking on here, because it's written on here every week. Connecting with God, each other, and the world. In a declining congregation, there may be a mission statement printed on the notices or the website, but it's not used to align human and financial resources, and it doesn't drive planning. There's no shared and compelling sense of purpose underlying congregational life. And lastly, maintaining rather than renewing. The members' strongest desire is to feel comfortable in the church. When issues arise, people view them as problems to be solved so that things can get back to normal. They feel most comfortable replicating things that have been done before. In a declining church, leaders strive to keep people happy rather than lead them in faithful living. Leaders are wary of taking risks and making mistakes. I think we have reached a situation in the West like that of Paul in Athens. He was totally amazed at the culture that he found there. And if we're honest, looking at our culture, it's beyond belief sometimes. When the press secretary of the President of the United States can stand up and lie through his teeth and then have it called alternative facts, we know we're in trouble. When people are famous for doing nothing other than maybe taking their clothes off for a camera. When so many people spend hours watching reality TV, there is nothing real about reality TV, just in case you're wondering. Our age is now called post-truth, because people spend so much time on social media interacting with people like them that they never hear an alternative opinion, or if they do, they simply slag it off as being worthless. Nobody wants to listen to anybody who might set themselves up as a professional, somebody who actually knows something. The good news is that there is hope for the future. Loads of people aren't going to like it because it involves change. That's a kind of bad word in the church. We can't just do what we've always done. In the cycle of an organisation, it is possible to go back to those beginning stages, to dream a new dream, to start again from the beginning, to do things differently, to set it up differently and to work at it differently, to be re-empowered, to be re-enthused, to have that passion and that excitement just growing and bubbling away again. To see lives being transformed, to see the gospel doing what it's supposed to do and changing people and starting here with me and with you. Because the other way leads to death. That's the truth of the matter. And you might say, we should be praying for revival. That's the way to go. And of course we should. I hope you are. It would be brilliant. It would be absolutely fantastic if God today just decided, Prestwick, here you go. It would be fantastic. But you know what? I look at the Isle of Lewis, where in the 50s they had a revival. And hundreds and hundreds of people came to faith in Christ. Lives were totally transformed. So many people went into the mission field or into ministry, and it was fantastic. But where is it now? It's back at what they knew and were doing 50 years ago. It never moved on. There was this big emotional experience, and lives were changed. Of course they were, because God was at work. But what happens is we default to what we know. That's what an organisation does. That's what the church does. We go back to what we know, and what we know is killing us. There has to be a better way. There has to be a different way. Part of that is preparing people who not only want to lead through change, but have the ability and the capacity to do it. It involves preparing people to do new things in new ways and understand that the church might not look like this a few years from now. It will involve conflict. Every book, every article on church growth and church change and transition says so. And if we're honest, so does our experience. When you want to do something different, you know you're going to face opposition. Lasting change happens as people are drawn forward by a purpose, a vision, and values, deciding for themselves that it's worthwhile doing it. The truth is that most congregations end up staying on their original path, even if they start out wanting to change, even if they start out looking for renewal. I'll talk a wee bit more about that next week. But what has been shown to work is when people in the congregations find themselves hungry for personal and communal time with God. When congregational renewal can't progress without the congregation becoming and staying anchored in God and what God says and what God wants for them and their community. It's all to do with the people. The leader has a role, but it's all to do with the people. It comes down to how much the people want a new future and whether they're willing to take responsibility for it. Paul was able to show how God had been involved in Athens in the past and that he was still involved today, and that's what we have to do together and in our community. God is at work. God has been at work and God will be at work, and we need to show people what that means and find it out for ourselves. I want to ask you a question. I want you to, or can you think of a time in your experience when you remember the church really being what you thought church should be? A moment, a time when you just thought, oh yes, that's what it should be. Maybe it's a conference. Maybe, there has just been this moment when you've seen something or experienced something and you've thought, yes, that's what church is about. If you haven't, that's a bit of an issue. If you have, what I want you to do is think of the difference it would make to you and to other people if that memory, if that moment was the normal state of things in the church. Renewal happens as you make a habit of living a new life. Don't ever underestimate your power to change things. Change happens one member at a time as people live it out in their lives. Amen.